Pick it up, boy. That 20 is worth more than your kind will ever earn using their brains. Richard, please. He's just a child. A child? Angela, your son has been standing in front of my $50,000 chessboard for 10 minutes. Maybe he thinks it's part of the dessert table. Laughter rolled across the ballroom like it had been waiting for permission. Careful, Richard. Maybe the boy actually plays. Plays? Fine. One game. He beats me. I write him a check for $1 million. He loses, and he and his mother pack their things tonight and never set foot on this property again. Mr. Calloway, sir, please, I'm begging you. Mom, it's okay. You hear that, everybody? The maid's boy says yes. Somebody set up the board. This won't take long. You're right. It won't. 9 moves later, the loudest man in that ballroom was about to lose everything he had spent his whole life building. And here's a question worth sitting with for a second. Have you ever been laughed at by someone who had absolutely no idea who you really were? Because that's exactly what was about to happen inside a mansion in Lake Forest, Illinois, on a Saturday night in early autumn, in front of 200 of the wealthiest people on the North Shore. Before we go further, take a moment to subscribe, like this video, and tell me where you're watching from. It truly means a lot to see how far these stories connect with people around the world. Now let's go back, past the bet, past the party, past the $20 bill on the marble floor, and into the life that built a 14-year-old boy named Marcus Webb. The Calloway estate sat behind a wall of manicured hedges and wrought iron gates at the end of a road so quiet it didn't even have streetlights. 14 bedrooms, a private screening room, a 6-car garage that housed vehicles nobody ever seemed to drive anywhere except to be photographed next to. Richard Calloway, 57 years old, had built Calloway Capital from a single desk and a phone line into a $4 billion empire by doing one thing better than almost anyone else alive: finding a person's weak point and pressing on it until they folded. Wall Street called him a shark, and he wore it like a cologne. But if you spent any real time around Richard Calloway, you'd learn something the financial magazines never printed. The money was never really the point for him. Power was. Being watched, being feared a little, being the loudest voice in any room he walked into. That was the actual currency he collected. He collected other things too. Art he didn't understand, watches he never wore twice, and people. Guests at his parties had learned, without ever being told outright, to laugh at his jokes about a half-second before the punchline landed, the exact way an employee learns to laugh at the boss who signs the checks. And moving quietly through all that marble and chandelier light, almost invisible by design, was a woman named Angela Webb. Angela had cleaned the Calloway house for 6 years. Every weekday, she caught the 5:40 a.m. train out of a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Gary, Indiana, rode it across the state line into the wealth of Lake Forest, scrubbed 14 bedrooms that nobody actually slept in most nights, polished silver that nobody actually used, and rode the train home again after dark. Her knuckles were cracked from industrial bleach. Her lower back ached in a way she had simply stopped mentioning to anyone, including herself. She was 41 years old, and to most of the people in that house, she had been functionally invisible for most of those years. Richard Calloway never once called her by her name. To him, she was the help. When something went missing in that house, she was the first person questioned. When nothing went missing, no one ever apologized for the assumption. She absorbed all of it without complaint, not because she lacked pride, but because pride doesn't cover rent in Gary, Indiana, and her son needed school supplies, bus fare, and a future that didn't look like hers. There was one night, almost 2 years earlier, when a guest had knocked a crystal wine glass clean off the terrace railing during a party. Richard Calloway docked the cost from Angela's paycheck without a word of explanation. She found out 2 weeks later, standing at a bank counter, staring at a number that didn't add up. She didn't argue. She showed up again the next morning at 5:40, because that was the job, and the job was the plan, and the plan, every single piece of it, was her son. That son was Marcus. 14 years old, tall for his age in that gangly, not yet grown into himself way, with quiet, watchful eyes and a mouth that almost never opened unless it had to. After school let out at Gary Lincoln Academy, Marcus took 2 city buses across the state line to the Calloway estate, and waited in a corner of the kitchen until his mother's shift ended. The house had rules for him, unspoken but absolute. Stay in the corner, stay silent, touch nothing. So Marcus sat on a wooden stool near the pantry with a library book balanced on his knee, and made himself as small and forgettable as a 14-year-old boy possibly could. He carried straight A's at Lincoln Academy. One of his teachers had once pulled Angela aside after a parent conference and told her, with something like wonder in her voice, that her son had an unusually sharp mind. Angela had framed that note. It hung in their apartment beside a small, slightly faded photograph. An old man sitting at a stone chess table in a city park, hands like tree roots wrapped around a worn wooden piece. Hold on to that photograph. It matters later. Now, about the chessboard. It lived inside Richard Calloway's private study, displayed beneath a brass gallery lamp like a piece of religious art. Hand-carved walnut and maple pieces imported from a workshop in Vienna. $50,000, insured separately from the rest of the house's contents. Beside it hung a framed, slightly yellowed newspaper clipping. A much younger Richard Calloway, 20 years old, smirking over a trophy beneath a headline announcing him as a collegiate chess champion. 37 years later, he still wore that exact same smirk at every dinner party where the board came out. Chess was his favorite weapon of all, sharper even than money. He'd offer a game to any guest brave enough to sit down, then dismantle them piece by piece while narrating their every mistake out loud for the room's entertainment. You see what he did there? That's how people lose money with me too. And then, almost always, the line he loved best, delivered with a raised glass and a practiced little pause. No one in this room has ever beaten me. No one ever will. The guests would chuckle politely and study their shoes. Nobody ever truly challenged him. Beating Richard Calloway at chess was bad for business. Losing to him gracefully was simply the price of admission to his world. Everyone on the North Shore understood the unspoken rule. You let Richard win. But on one ordinary Thursday evening in late spring, something small happened in that study. Something nobody was ever meant to witness. Angela was vacuuming the upstairs hallway. Marcus was carrying a tray of glasses past the study door, a job a frazzled caterer had simply shoved into his hands without asking who he was, and he stopped walking. The display board had been arranged in mid-position, frozen in a recreation of a famous championship match. Except something about it was wrong. One white knight sat exactly 1 square off from where chess history had placed it, and that single misplaced square broke the entire logic of the position. Marcus knew that exact game the way other 14-year-olds knew song lyrics. He set the tray down on a side table without thinking about it. He glanced over his shoulder. Then he reached out and slid the knight 1 square to the left. A soft click of polished wood against wood. And suddenly the board made sense again. "Interesting," said a voice behind him. A silver-haired man stood in the doorway, holding a glass of club soda, dressed in a quiet gray suit that didn't try to announce itself the way everything else in that house did. Marcus froze, his heart hammering, already rehearsing an apology in his head. But the man only glanced at the corrected knight and then at the boy, the exact way a jeweler studies a stone everyone else in the room has walked right past without noticing. "Most people get that knight wrong," the man said quietly. "You didn't." Marcus grabbed his tray and was gone, before the stranger could say another word. He didn't catch the man's name that night. He would hear it again soon enough, spoken with real respect, in a room full of people who had none to spare for him. Later that evening, in the kitchen, Angela read her son's face the way only a mother who has spent 14 years memorizing it can. "You touched something in there," she said. It wasn't really a question. Marcus started to explain. The knight, the wrong square, the broken position, and she cut him off with a look she had spent 6 years perfecting into something close to a reflex. "Baby, listen to me. In this house, we don't correct rich men. We don't get noticed. Head down, hands to yourself, and we'll get home safely. You hear me?" "Yes, ma'am." He meant it too. Marcus Webb had absolutely no ambition to be noticed by anyone inside that house. He wanted to read his book, wait for his mother, and disappear quietly, the way he'd been trained to. But 3 weeks later, the invitations went out. Heavy cream cardstock, gold foil lettering. Calloway Capital had just crossed $4 billion in assets under management, and Richard Calloway was throwing himself a party large enough to make sure every wealthy zip code from Lake Forest to the Gold Coast knew it. 200 guests, state senators, fund managers, and a celebrity chef flown in from Manhattan just for the night. All week, the house filled with strangers and noise. Florists stacked white roses nearly to the ceiling of the ballroom. Workers strung lights across the back lawn until it looked like the grass had grown its own constellation. And through all of it, Richard Calloway walked the halls, rehearsing his toast under his breath, pausing at the study every single evening to admire the board, the clipping, and the much younger version of himself staring back at him. A king, quietly checking his own crown. Angela was scheduled for a double shift that night, which meant Marcus, with nowhere else to be, would spend the evening tucked into a corner of the kitchen on his usual stool, keeping his head down exactly as he'd been taught. For almost 3 full hours, it actually worked. Nobody noticed the boy in the kitchen at all. You know, stories like this always make me wonder how many quiet, overlooked people are sitting in rooms like that one right now, carrying something extraordinary that nobody around them has bothered to ask about. If this story is already pulling at you, drop a comment and tell me who in your own life reminds you of Marcus or his mother. I read every single one. The night of the party, the ballroom genuinely glittered, like someone had built a jewelry case big enough to walk into. 200 of the wealthiest people on the East Coast and Midwest sipped champagne under 3 separate chandeliers, and Richard Calloway floated through the crowd, collecting compliments the way other men collect rent. Around 10 o'clock, the catering staff ran short of hands. A flustered event manager pointed straight at Marcus. "Carry this. Go." So the boy in the slightly too small second-hand sneakers walked tray after tray through a room full of tuxedos, eyes down, exactly the way his mother had drilled into him. It worked, right up until the study. The doors had been propped open for the party, and the $50,000 board sat glowing under its brass lamp. Marcus only meant to walk past it, but the same position from 3 weeks earlier had been set back on display, and his feet stopped moving before the rest of him caught up. 5 seconds. That's all it took. Well, well, look at this. Richard Calloway's voice sliced through the room like a fork dragged across crystal. He stood in the study doorway with a dozen curious guests trailing behind him, a tumbler of scotch in one hand, a grin already loaded and ready to fire. "The helper's kid, studying my board. You like that, boy? Do you have any idea what it costs? More than your mother makes in an entire year." Laughter. The kind that travels, that pulls more bodies toward it, like it's announcing free food. More guests drifted over, sensing some kind of show was about to start. Somewhere behind them, Angela appeared in the doorway and went pale. Calloway reached into his pocket, peeled a crisp $20 bill off a money clip, and tossed it at the boy's feet. It spun once in the air, floated, and landed flat on the marble floor. "Pick it up. That's more money than your kind will ever earn using their brains." Marcus didn't move. He looked down at the bill, then up at the man, and said absolutely nothing. The silence stretched out just long enough to become its own kind of embarrassment for everyone standing there. Then a slightly tipsy voice cut through it from somewhere in the crowd. "Careful, Richard. Maybe the boy actually plays." And there it was. The exact opening Richard Calloway never, ever turned down. An audience, a target, a stage already half built for him. He set his scotch down on a side table and spread his arms wide, like a ringmaster about to announce the night's main event. "You know what? Tonight I'm feeling generous. One game. The kid beats me. Undefeated in this house for 20 years. I write him a check for $1 million. He paused, waiting for the gasp, and got exactly the reaction he wanted. If he loses, he and his mother pack their things and never set foot on this property again. "Mr. Calloway, sir, please." Angela pushed through the crowd, her tray forgotten somewhere behind her, her voice shaking in a way Marcus had never once heard from his mother in 14 years. "He's 14. We don't want any trouble. I'm begging you." "Then your boy should learn to keep his eyes off my things." Marcus looked at his mother. Her cracked, bleach-worn hands were twisting the hem of her apron into a knot. 6 years of swallowed insults were standing right there in front of him, visibly trembling. Then he looked back down at the $20 bill lying on the marble floor like a dare nobody had asked him to accept. Somewhere in his pocket his fingers found a small, smooth, wooden chess king. Its crown had been worn nearly flat by 2 generations of thumbs. "Okay," Marcus said. "One game." The room erupted with laughter, scattered applause, and someone already shouting for a table to be cleared. Angela closed her eyes. Richard Calloway beamed at his audience like he'd just been handed an award. "You hear that, everybody? The maid's boy accepts. This won't take long." He was right about that part. He just had the winner backwards. Because what nobody standing in that ballroom understood, not even the man holding the money clip, was exactly where this quiet, watchful boy had spent every single Saturday of his childhood and who had been sitting across from him the entire time, teaching him something no private school in Lake Forest could ever put on a transcript. While the staff cleared a long table at the center of the ballroom and 200 guests pressed in close for the show, Marcus Webb sat very still in his chair. And in his mind, he wasn't in a mansion at all anymore. He was 9 years old again, sitting in a public park in Detroit, watching an old man with hands like tree roots carefully set up a worn chessboard piece by piece. Samuel Reed, Angela's father. Everybody who gathered at the stone tables in Liberty Park simply called him Pop. For nearly 40 years, Pop had been a legend that absolutely nobody famous had ever heard of. A hotel doorman by trade, a chess player by something closer to calling. He spent every Saturday at those weathered stone tables, taking on anyone willing to sit down, for $5 a game. College kids killing time, serious club players looking for an easy win, and once even a touring chess master who stopped smiling somewhere around move 12. Pop beat every single one of them, then shook their hands afterward and quietly slid half the money back across the table to more than half of them. He never once played in a rated tournament in his life. Entry fees cost money, and money went toward rent, toward Angela growing up, and eventually toward a grandson with watchful eyes who showed up every Saturday, rain or shine. The official chess world never learned his name. The park knew it. For Pop, the park had always been enough. Marcus was 5 years old the first time Pop sat him down at a board. While other kids his age were memorizing cartoon theme songs, Marcus was learning that a knight moves in an L shape and thinks like a knife. Quiet, sideways, and dangerous from an angle you don't expect. Every Saturday for 6 straight years, rain or shine, Pop taught him openings the unhurried way other grandfathers teach fishing, patiently, with stories attached to every single move. He taught endgames on a board with one missing pawn, replaced permanently with a flattened bottle cap. And above every single tactic and opening he ever showed his grandson, Pop taught him one lesson more than any other. The board doesn't ask your color, son, doesn't ask your zip code, or your daddy's bank account, or what kind of car dropped you off. 64 squares, same pieces on both sides. It's about the only truly fair place I have ever found in this entire country. So when you sit down at this board, you sit down as equals. Nobody gets to take that from you. By 11, Marcus was beating everybody at those stone tables except the old man himself. Pop studied his grandson across the board one quiet October afternoon and saw something in his eyes that made his own eyes shine a little brighter than usual. "You're better than me now, boy," he said softly. "Don't go telling anybody yet." That winter, Pop's heart began to fail. On the last Saturday he was strong enough to leave the hospital bed. They set the old board across his lap on a hospital blanket. His hands shook too much to properly lift the pieces, but he played anyway, slow and careful. Halfway through the game, he stopped completely, picked up his white king, the one with the crown worn nearly smooth from 40 years under his thumb, and folded it gently into his grandson's palm. "Listen to me now," he whispered. "One day, somebody is going to look at you and see nothing but a poor kid who doesn't belong wherever he's standing. They'll laugh at you before you ever even touch a piece. Don't argue with them. Don't shout. You let the board speak for you. The board never lies." He died on a Tuesday morning. Marcus was 11 years old. He didn't cry at the funeral. Instead, he walked to Liberty Park alone, sat down at the empty stone table that had once belonged to his grandfather, and quietly played both sides of Pop's favorite recorded game, from memory until the streetlights flickered on above him. After that, the game went underground. A second-hand laptop someone had donated to their church. Free online chess sites. A username that gave absolutely nothing away. Iron Pawn 14. Over the next 3 years, he played more than 10,000 games, often played well past midnight with the screen brightness turned all the way down so his mother wouldn't notice the glow under his bedroom door. He studied grandmaster games the way some people study scripture, replaying the same moves over and over until the patterns lived permanently in his hands instead of just his memory. By 14, Iron Pawn 14 carried an online rating of 2,412, solidly master level. Strong club players learned to avoid him entirely, and he'd developed something close to a personal trademark. He specifically hunted aggressive players, the ones who attacked early, grabbed pawns greedily, and chased a single piece across the board like a bully chasing lunch money down a hallway. Marcus had spent 3 years quietly building a private collection of traps tailor-made for exactly that kind of player. He could smell that particular brand of arrogance through a computer screen before the third move was even finished. His mother never fully knew any of it. Not really. She saw the laptop glow under the door and assumed homework. Chess was the one true secret Marcus had ever kept from her, not out of shame, but because that game was the one remaining room in the entire world where his grandfather was still somehow alive. He hadn't been ready to share that room with anybody yet. Now, in a Lake Forest ballroom full of strangers laughing at the Maid's son, a man worth $4 billion cracked his knuckles theatrically over a $50,000 board. Marcus pulled out his chair and sat down. Under the table, out of sight, his thumb found the worn crown of a small wooden king tucked in his pocket. Somebody's going to look at you and see nothing but a poor kid who doesn't belong. Okay, Pop, he thought. Let's let the board speak. They'd set the table directly beneath the largest chandelier in the room, on Calloway's insistence. If he were going to teach the helper's kid a public lesson, the whole North Shore was going to watch him do it properly. 2 staff members carried the $50,000 board in from the study like pallbearers carrying something sacred. Phones came out everywhere at once, dozens of them, raised over shoulders, tiny red recording lights blinking like a field of watching eyes. A hedge fund manager's nephew opened a live stream right there on the spot. 40 viewers within a minute, then 200, then climbing. Remember those phones, they matter later. As Calloway rolled up his sleeves with exaggerated ceremony, the same silver-haired man from the study 3 weeks earlier stepped quietly out of the crowd. "Richard, if there's real money riding on this, you'll want a neutral referee." "Daniel?" Calloway lit up immediately. "Everyone, this is Daniel Voss. Grandmaster Daniel Voss. The real thing, ranked among the best in the entire country back in his day. Perfect. Now nobody in this room can say I didn't beat the boy fair and square." Marcus looked up, and recognized those same calm eyes instantly. The man from the study, the one who had quietly watched him fix the broken position weeks earlier. Voss gave absolutely no outward sign that they'd ever met before. He simply took up a position beside the table and asked, in a voice pitched to carry across the entire ballroom, "State the terms clearly for the room, Richard." Calloway obliged, savoring every single syllable of it. $1 million to the boy if he wins. If he loses, he and his mother leave my employment and my property tonight, permanently. Witnessed, Voss said simply. 200 phones just witnessed it too, someone in the crowd added, and a ripple of nervous laughter moved through the room. Calloway dropped into his chair and spun the board so the white pieces faced him. "I play white. I always play white." He smirked across the table at the boy. "First lesson, completely free of charge. White moves first. That means I attack, and you suffer." Marcus said nothing at all. He simply centered each of his pieces, one at a time, exactly the way Pop had taught him years earlier. Touch each soldier before the battle begins. Know exactly where everyone lives on that board. Move 1. Calloway slammed his king's pawn forward 2 full squares, hard enough to rattle the row of pieces behind it. The classic, almost arrogant opening of a man announcing his own arrival. A few guests actually applauded, as if pushing a single pawn forward had somehow already earned a trophy. Marcus answered before the applause even finished. A pawn to meet his pawn, center against center, the oldest reply in the entire history of the game. 3 seconds, maybe less. "Fast hands," Calloway said, smirking. "Fast hands lose fast games." Move 2, and here came the queen. Calloway swung his most powerful piece into the open, far too early, sliding her toward the boy's king side, eyeing the one weak square that only a king can ever truly defend. It was an old bar fight of a move, a classic 4-move checkmate attempt, exactly the kind of cheap attack that destroys total beginners and quietly embarrasses anyone who actually understands the game. Somewhere in the crowd, a man who clearly knew chess leaned toward his date and whispered, "He's going for the 4-move mate. He's trying to end a 14-year-old in 4 moves." Marcus glanced at the queen, then he did something small and strange. He smiled, not at Calloway, but down at the board itself, the exact way you might smile at an old friend telling you a joke you've already heard 100 times before. His knight came off the back row, calm as a doorman greeting a regular guest, defending the threatened square and developing a new piece in the very same breath. 4 seconds. At the edge of the table, Grandmaster Daniel Voss stopped watching the game and started watching the boy instead. Because Voss had personally witnessed that exact defensive reply 10,000 times across his career, but almost never once from a true amateur. Amateurs panic the instant a queen comes charging at them. They throw pawns in front of her like sandbags stacked against a flood. This boy hadn't flinched even slightly. His knight hadn't just defended the square, it had claimed the center of the board and quietly asked the queen a question of its own. And now what? Move 3. Calloway developed his bishop, angling it down the long diagonal straight toward the boy's king, like a sniper finding his window. 3 moves, he announced loudly to the room. From ending this entirely. He checked his watch with theatrical flair. Somebody want to call the kid a cab? He'll be needing it soon. Laughter rippled through the crowd again. In the back of the room, Angela gripped a door frame with both hands, her lips moving silently in something close to prayer. A young waitress quietly touched her shoulder and stayed standing beside her without saying a word. Then Marcus made his 3rd move, and the room got its very first real surprise of the night. He pushed a pawn forward on the edge of the board, a small, almost meaningless-looking move that seemed to accomplish nothing at all, except it left one of his other pawns sitting completely alone, undefended, directly in the path of Calloway's wandering queen, a free gift, wrapped and ribboned. The whisperer in the crowd groaned audibly. Oh no, the kid just hung a pawn. He blew it. Calloway saw it too. His grin widened, hungry now. You see that, everybody? This is exactly what happens when you let people sit down at tables they don't belong at. His hand drifted lazily over the queen. I almost feel a little bad taking it. Daniel Voss's eyes narrowed. The smallest possible flicker. Gone again in half a second. He had seen that pawn too. And unlike everyone else standing in that ballroom, he had also seen exactly what was quietly waiting behind it. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who thought they had you completely figured out, this is the part of the story you came for. So stay with me, because what happens in the next 60 seconds is the entire reason people are still talking about this night. Under the table, out of sight of every single phone camera in the room, Marcus's thumb brushed across the worn wooden crown one more time. The trap his grandfather had taught him on a rainy Saturday afternoon years earlier, the one built specifically for bullies who chase lunch money across a playground, was finally open for business. All it needed now was one arrogant man's hand closing around that queen. Calloway picked her up. Move 4. The queen swallowed the undefended pawn whole. He held the captured piece up between two fingers for the crowd like a trophy, turning it slowly so everyone could admire it. "One down," he announced grandly. "The rest are coming soon enough." Light applause. Someone even whistled. What he didn't notice, what almost nobody in that room noticed, was exactly where his queen now stood, deep inside enemy territory. Far, far from home, surrounded entirely by squares that already belonged to a 14-year-old boy who had been waiting his whole life for exactly this moment. Here's the thing about traps, the way Pop used to explain it at those stone tables in Liberty Park. You don't catch a wolf by chasing it across an open field. You catch it by making it hungry enough to walk straight into the cage on its own. Move 5 came fast. Marcus slid his other knight forward, quiet as a held breath, and suddenly the queen had nowhere safe left to retreat to. Calloway's smirk flickered for the very first time all night. He studied the board a beat longer than he wanted anyone to notice, then snapped his queen sideways, trying to slip free along the only open diagonal left. It wasn't free. It was exactly where Marcus needed her to go. Move 6, and the room went quiet in a way it hadn't been all evening. Marcus brought his bishop out from behind his own pawns, and for the first time, the trap fully revealed itself. Not just to Daniel Voss, who already understood, but to anyone in that ballroom who actually knew how to read a board. The queen was trapped. Not captured yet, but cornered, with every single escape square covered by a piece that had been waiting patiently 3 moves in advance. "Wait," the whisperer in the crowd said, suddenly leaning forward instead of smirking. "Wait, her queen's stuck. She's actually stuck." Calloway's jaw tightened. He stared at the board for nearly a full minute, an eternity by the standards of a man who usually finished amateur opponents in under 10 moves, searching for an escape that simply didn't exist. Finally, with no good option left, he sacrificed his queen for a knight and a pawn, trying to salvage something from the wreckage. The exchange left him down material and, more importantly, down momentum, in front of 200 guests and a live stream that had now climbed past 400 viewers. "Lucky," he muttered, loud enough for the table to hear, but quiet enough that it didn't quite reach the back of the room. Lucky opening means nothing. But Daniel Voss, standing perfectly still beside the board, knew exactly what he was watching. This wasn't luck. This was a 14-year-old boy executing a structure he had clearly drilled hundreds, maybe thousands of times before. A structure built specifically to punish exactly the kind of aggressive, ego-driven attack Richard Calloway had opened with. Voss had spent 4 decades around serious chess players. He recognized inherited knowledge when he saw it sitting across a board. Somebody, somewhere, had taught this boy everything he knew with extraordinary patience. And whoever that person was, Voss found himself thinking, they should have been famous. The middle game stretched on for nearly 40 more minutes. Calloway, rattled now and playing more cautiously than he had in years, tried to claw back ground, trading pieces wherever he could to simplify the position and buy himself time to think. Marcus matched him move for move, calm and unhurried, his eyes rarely leaving the board, his expression never once changing. Not when guests gasped, not when his own mother quietly wept near the back wall, not when the live stream's viewer count flashed past 2,000, and someone in the crowd whispered that it was being shared on social media in real time. He simply played. Touch each soldier before the battle. Know exactly where everyone lives. By the endgame, the math on the board had become brutally simple, the kind of simple that even guests who didn't know chess could understand just from watching the faces around the table. Marcus held a rook and 2 pawns more than his opponent. Calloway's king stood exposed in the open center of the board, stripped of nearly all its protection, while Marcus's pieces had quietly encircled it from 3 different directions without anyone in the room fully realizing it was happening until it already had. "Check," Marcus said, his very first word of the entire game. Calloway's hand hovered over his king, searching for a square that would buy him even one more move. There wasn't one. He shifted the king sideways anyway, delaying the inevitable by a single breath. Marcus moved his rook. Checkmate. For a moment, nobody in that ballroom made a single sound. 200 guests, dozens of phones, a live stream now pushing past 5,000 viewers, and absolute, total silence. Then Daniel Voss leaned forward, studied the final position for exactly 3 seconds, and said, in that same voice built to carry across a room, "Checkmate confirmed. Clean, legitimate. The boy wins." The room exploded, not in laughter this time, but in something closer to disbelief, turning rapidly into awe. Somebody started clapping, hesitant at first, and then it spread through the crowd like wildfire jumping a dry field. Angela's knees actually buckled, and the young waitress beside her caught her arm before she could go down, both of them crying openly now, no longer trying to hide it. Richard Calloway sat frozen, staring at a board that had just publicly humiliated him in front of every important person he knew, live-streamed to thousands of strangers who would absolutely never let him forget it. His face cycled through about 4 different emotions in the space of 10 seconds. Disbelief, anger, something that almost looked like fear, and finally, a kind of cornered desperation. "This is absurd," he said, standing up so fast his chair nearly toppled backward. "He cheated, somehow. I don't know how, but there's no possible way a maid's kid from wherever just beat me at my own board." "Richard." Daniel Voss's voice didn't rise at all, but it cut through the room more sharply than anything Calloway had said all night. "I have spent 40 years around this game. That was not luck, and it was certainly not cheating. That was a structurally sound, deeply rehearsed defensive system, executed flawlessly under enormous pressure, against an aggressive opponent who walked directly into it. I watched every single move. 200 phones watched every single move. You set the terms yourself, in front of this entire room, and you lost." Calloway's eyes swept the crowd, searching for an ally, a way out, anyone willing to back him up. He found nothing but 200 faces, most of them already holding up phones, several of them already typing furiously into group chats and comment sections that would not be kind to him by morning. The live stream kept climbing. 6,000 viewers, 7. This is usually the moment in a story where you want to scream at the screen. And honestly, if you've made it this far, you've earned the right to. Drop a comment right now and tell me what you think Richard Calloway does next, because what actually happened surprised even the people standing in that ballroom. For a long, tense moment, it looked like Richard Calloway might simply refuse the entire bet outright, laugh it off, claim it was all a joke, or threaten to have security walk the boy and his mother out anyway, terms be damned. He'd built an entire career on never honoring an agreement that no longer benefited him. But this time, something was different. This time, there were thousands of witnesses who would never forget it, and a public reputation that thrived entirely on the appearance of fairness and dominance. A reputation that was currently bleeding out in real time across 100 different phone screens. A state senator standing near the back of the room cleared his throat loudly. "Richard, you said it yourself, in front of all of us. $1 million, witnessed." Several other guests murmured in agreement, the social pressure in the room shifting visibly, almost physically, away from the man who had built that ballroom and toward the 14-year-old boy who had just dismantled him at his own game. Calloway's shoulders dropped, just slightly. The fight drained out of him the way it does from men who realize, often too late, that the audience they spent their whole life performing for has just turned. He walked stiffly to a writing desk near the study, pulled out a checkbook with hands that weren't entirely steady, and wrote the number out in full, $1 million. He didn't say a word as he handed it across the table to Marcus, his jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. Marcus took the check, folded it once, and slid it into the same pocket where the small wooden king still rested. "And the other half of the agreement," Daniel Voss added quietly, "was that you would never threaten this family's livelihood again. I believe that's now permanently off the table as well." Calloway didn't answer. He simply turned and walked out of his own ballroom, past 200 guests who had come to celebrate his empire, and instead watched it crack quietly down the middle in under an hour. Angela reached her son before anyone else could, pulling him into the kind of hug that 6 years of swallowed insults had been waiting to release. "Baby," she whispered into his shoulder, "where did you learn to play like that? When did you learn to play like that?" Marcus pulled the small wooden king from his pocket and pressed it gently into her palm, the same way it had once been pressed into his. "Pop taught me," he said simply. "Every Saturday." "I never stopped." Angela's hand closed around the worn crown, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she let herself cry openly in front of strangers, not from exhaustion or humiliation, but from something that finally felt like relief. Daniel Voss approached them quietly as the crowd began to disperse, guests still buzzing, still recording, still trying to process what they'd just witnessed. He extended a hand to Marcus. "Son, I run a scholarship program connected to a chess academy outside Chicago. I'd very much like to talk with you and your mother about it whenever you're both ready. What you did tonight wasn't luck, and it wasn't even really about the money. That was 4 years of discipline and somebody's love poured into a 14-year-old kid who never once gave up on it, even in the dark, even with nobody watching." Marcus glanced down at the worn wooden king now resting safely in his mother's hand, then back up at the Grandmaster. "He used to tell me the board doesn't ask your zip code. It doesn't ask for anybody's bank account. He said it was the only fair place he'd ever found." "He sounds like he was a remarkable man," Voss said. "He was," Marcus said quietly. "Nobody famous ever knew his name, but the park knew him." By the next morning, the live stream clip had been shared and reshared until it had crossed several million views across multiple platforms. The Maid's son, the billionaire, the $50,000 board, the checkmate that nobody in that room saw coming. News outlets picked it up within days. Reporters wanted to know who had taught a 14-year-old from Gary, Indiana, to play at a master level in complete secrecy. Marcus and Angela kept the answer simple every single time. A grandfather, a public park, a $5 entry fee, and a king with a crown worn smooth by 2 generations of hands that refused to let go of what mattered. Angela never returned to the Calloway estate. She didn't need to. Within a month, with Daniel Voss's help, she'd found work she could actually be proud of, and Marcus enrolled at the chess academy outside Chicago on a full scholarship, the first of what would eventually become several. He kept the wooden king in his pocket at every tournament he ever played afterward, win or lose. Somewhere along the way, people stopped asking how a boy from a working-class family had learned to play like that and started simply calling him what he'd quietly always been, ever since he was 5 years old sitting across a stone table in a Detroit city park. A player who had been taught, patiently, by somebody who believed 64 squares could be the one truly fair place left in an unfair world. Before we close out tonight, I want to ask you something. If a story like this one moved you even a little, if it reminded you that the people we overlook are sometimes carrying the most extraordinary things inside them, take a second and let me know in the comments. It genuinely keeps these stories alive, and it lets me know which ones to tell next. Richard Calloway's name still appears in the financial papers from time to time, though a little less often now, and never quite the same way it used to. The story of the night his own board beat him followed him for a long time, the way these things tend to. But the story that actually mattered, the one that people kept retelling years later, was never really about him at all. It was about a quiet woman who rode a 5:40 a.m. train for 6 straight years without once losing sight of the plan. It was about an old doorman in a city park who never once played for fame, only for love, $5 at a time. And it was about a 14-year-old boy who learned, the hard way and the right way, that the board never lies, and neither does the patience of somebody who truly believes in you. If this story stayed with you tonight, that's exactly why we tell them. Thank you for spending this time with me. If you'd like to hear another one, hit subscribe, leave a like, and drop a comment below, and we'll see you in the next story, right here on Untold Maid Confessions.